This is Ron of the Ronnie Record Show. This is our weekly episode. Karen, my beautiful wife, is at
Behind the scenes.
unseen, but certainly will be heard. So, for the last week, I've been fussing and mussing about the British invasion, and I probably have just talked about this before to Karen's disgust about why I didn't like the Beatles. Well, I'm going to clear that up today, and I cleared it up a little bit with my sorts last week, but I want to talk about a little bit more. I've always tried to do an intellectual thing, trying to understand the evolution of music, how my music in the 50s evolved. And here's what, if you care to come a little closer, see the origins I've talked about before, but I kind of drawn it out for you. There were the crooners like Bing Crosby and those folks before in the early 50s. And I call that, it's not unfair to call it schlock rock, but that's where Pat Boone and then eventually Paul Anka, Bobby Darin, all the Bobbies. Later on, in the early 60s, it was Paul and Paula. It's a more of a rock, schlock, pop kind of evolution. Then there was rockabilly that started like with Bill Haley. Bill Haley was Bill Haley and the Saddlemen before he became Bill Haley and the Comets and jumped on the rock and roll bandwagon. But that included, at the Sun label mostly, Carl Perkins, Elvis, and Jerry Lee Lewis, and then it was Gene Vincent, and you got Buddy Knox. I'm kind of going up the scale here. Conway Twitty, pushing 59, 60. Brenda Lee was in there, 1960 and beyond. So you see that evolution. And then we got doo-wop. I say like the Ink Spots were a group in the 40s that could be involved into the Chords, the Crows, primarily the Platters with Only You. And then there was the Flamingos, I Only Have Eyes for You, the Diamonds, the Elegants. Again, this is at the end of the 50s into the 60s. The Marcells doing Blue Moon, the Dovell doing the Bristol Stomp, and again, evolving somewhere. Then we also have the strain, the genre of rhythm and blues. That was like with Louis Jordan. I've talked about him more recently in my sorts. And that would be like Fats Domino, Lloyd Price, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Bobby Day getting on in the late 50s, Bobby Lewis probably early 60s and on. Then you had like ballad rock and roll, which I call, and you could think of Billy Eckstine back in the early 50s, and you think of Johnny Mathis and Tommy Edwards. It's all in the game. And Dinah Washington and Tony Fisher later on in the era, and Timmy Euro. So that's the evolution of this kind of music, the teenage music that I loved in the 50s. Now, how did this all end up in 1964 with the Beatles and the British invasion? I couldn't get there from here because I had to really realize that the music, that was an evolution I'm going for. In reality, 1964 was a revolution. Just like my music was a revolution from my parents' day, but I could still see the evolution, as you can see from there. I can't do that with the Beatles. I can't do it. And I'll tell you what I've come to conclusion is that it really was a revolution of culture. It was a revolution of everything that happened in the early 60s, the protests and all of that I wasn't part of. This revolution here signaled to me the end of my music. So capture that term. Think of that term, my music. You'll know a lot of people in their early days right here when I was that 14, 15-year-old kid, the Ronnie Records logo, that kid in the 50s all of a sudden opened up to this new music. It wasn't because intellectually I said, oh, that music better. I mean, I probably thought that back in the 50s like a lot of us do. But it was at that era when so many times we develop our musical taste, where it comes to our heart, not so much our head. We go and identify with it. Rock Around the Clock, Elvis, all that music was our music, the kids of the 50s. This was not our music. And I probably thought about it before, but this is like Karen's music. She grew up at that. This was when she was a young teeny popper. This became her music. And I'm 81 years old, I finally really start to figure it out that it's got nothing to do with the music. If I was making fun during one of my shorts of I want to hold your hand, well, come on, I like the Purple People Eater and the Witch Doctor, So it's not really about the quality of the music or, I know my friend Graham from Britain, he's a musician, so he thinks about the quality of music. And I do too, the more I'm educated on YouTube about music, I can really understand that. But these people right here did not reach my heart. I was the 50s. These people who are the pre-Beatles, the Quarrymen, when they were in Hamburg, Germany, actually, Paul McCartney's my age. My music reached his heart. He loved Chuck Berry, right? This is Memphis, an instrumental version of a Chuck Berry song, right? They all love that music that I grew up with because most of them were my age, right? But then what happened is, here's what really happened that I just recently thought of is, they branded themselves, and that's not a term in that day, right? They branded themselves with a new form of music. And what I read the other day, it was kind of a blending of British skiffle music and a little bit of the old rock and roll, but it was really new. I Want to Hold Your Hand, and all those songs were not the old blue bars, 12-bar blues beat or the doo-wop sound that I had. They came up with a new sound at this time. They branded themselves with the new haircuts. They had hair like people in the 50s had. This guy right here, this is a 50s image. This is the 50s kind of modified car. This is a brand. Nobody thought of it as a brand, right? What the Beatles did, they rebranded themselves. They became the icon of a new era. It was a new era I wasn't part of, that's all. And it had nothing to do with the music in a sense like that. So that's all I want to come up with today. Silly me, I finally realized exactly what it was. It's that heart. I was just coming home from my errands recently, listened to Sirius Radio, 50s music, what have you. And I'm listening to doo-wop music and I'm alive again. I'm that kid again. Now that doesn't mean I don't like some 60s music. I even like a lot of Beatles music now. I like some progressive jazz, but it doesn't reach me the same way that my music and you 50s people understand that it's our music. So that's my little lecture today about how I finally figured out my aversion to the British invasion. And maybe Karen will be relieved that I don't really have to bring it up much anymore. Right, Karen?
You're right. You're right.
So anyway, that's it for today, this week. I hope you enjoyed the Ronnie Record Show. Watch my shorts that I put out every single day on all these kind of topics, musical topics, about the 50s. I must admit, mainly about the 50s, my music, the 60s and the 70s. So thank you very much for watching the Ronnie Record Show.